Hi, this is Greg Remke, and this is a presentation, The Informal Education Revolution. This is part of the Mackinac Center's high school debate workshop for the coming year's national debate topic on K-12 education, and this is the second in our workshop presentations on the economics of federal education policy reform. My background is in economics. I have a degree from the University of Washington, focus on economic history, and I've been a speaker at the Mackinac Center programs for many years. Again, our topic is resolved the U.S. federal government should substantially increase funding or regulation of elementary and or secondary education in the U.S. Now, this discussion here is going to be on education innovation around the world and the relevance for U.S. reforms. And I'm going to start with a marvelous Wired magazine cover story called The Next Steve Jobs, and pictured on the front is a student from a high school or a elementary school actually in Mexico. And then I'm going to show how the inspiration for this article about Mexico comes from a presentation by an Indian economic researcher and child-driven education, and his work begins with James Tooley and Newcastle University and research in informal education around the world. So background for this, if you think about what's relevant in the federal policies for education today, delivering education to the poor, addressing the inequality issues for education for low-income families, inner-city schools, and so forth. How could we deliver better quality education to low-income families? Well, news from around the world where people are far, far poorer and successful education reform and innovation there could be helpful for us. So that's the purpose, and really this is a quick, I'm basically encouraging you to read a couple magazine articles and watch a couple TED videos. And if you stopped right now and watched these, you'd probably be okay. But if you've hung on to the slide, the title of the article is "The Radical Method of Learning Could, Discover a Generation of Geniuses." Pictured at right is the elementary school teacher in Mexico and his top student who was discovered as he did research. This primary school is next to a dump across the U.S. border in Mexico, and again, you can read this in the Wired magazine article. I'll link at the bottom. The teacher, trying to do something better to improve his classroom where he's sort of stuck with terrible textbooks and a boring situation for him and for the students. He's trying to, make a difference. He gets some internet access and discovers some TED videos about an experiment that took place in India where students taught themselves just through their curiosity. And he starts the new school year. He starts with this, instead of teaching a regular math class, he starts with his kids in work groups in the classroom, and basically his goal is to have them follow their interests, follow their passions, to find ways to just encourage their curiosity in their own research, even though his school doesn't have internet, has very limited capabilities, technology. He gradually discovers that one of his students, who's a quiet kid in the back, always seems to know the answer. She doesn't make a big thing out of it, but when anything comes up, she knows. He begins to test her more and more and finds out whatever the question is, she knows. She's apparently a math wizard. And so he begins to, she leads the group. And again, the story of how they manage the classroom, where the teacher is the coach or the mentor of the students, and young students help out other students as they tackle certain problems. And it's a fascinating story, one that is inspiring, I think, to teachers and informative in our efforts to provide better education in the United States. So from that story, the argument is that we have problems in the U.S. today in our schools, and we can learn from this. So this is text from the article that you can read online. Starts with, hundreds of thousands of kids drop out of our high schools in the U.S. every year. And those that do graduate, almost a third are not prepared for college. So a huge amount of money is spent at the college level to try and do remedial education for these students, but it's a problem. So how do we improve the delivery of education service or help get students more interested in these subjects? The World Economic Forum ranks the U.S. 49th out of 148 developed and developing countries in math and science instruction. So if our goal is to improve math and science and other subjects, finding new methodologies or new ways that work in the developing world should be relevant for us. One of the education officials in this article says, look, the fundamental basis of our system is flawed. The teacher with a textbook and the set materials decided by the school district, the state, the federal government, that constraint, that traditional but not working for us the way it should. So we start with Sugarta Mitra's 1999 hole-in-the-wall experiment, and you can watch this online. It's the most exciting. He is a compelling speaker, but basically he's in India and he puts a computer terminal in a very poor Indian neighborhood, and basically leaves it there and to see if the kids will be interested, and they are interested. They teach themselves all sorts of things on their own just because they're curious. So this is an experiment from India, and this is research on this that he conducted, and he's telling in this TED video. But basically, kids learned a number of things. In the first experiment, they learned just English and how the computer worked and needed more memory and so forth. But in his later talks, he went to another part of India, set up a computer, and basically the kids taught themselves not only English, but a fairly sophisticated set of genetics and biology issues, and they had a teacher sort of helping them, but just as a consultant. But anyway, his argument is we need he calls it a grandmother cloud. That is, when he first started his experiment, they had computers, but not high-speed internet. Now, in the US, we have high-speed internet, or not as high as, of course, South Korea, but faster. And in India and the rest of the world, internet is coming. So he's modified his views a bit to say, look, given that it's not just a computer kids can learn from, but they can access the cloud, how do we build a school that allows students to explore these various ways? And again, going back to the story of the school in Mexico, access to these things already serve to allow really bright students to be discovered. The student in that school, I think, came out the top in the country in the math tests, but she never would have been discovered unless this new way of teaching had been used in her school. You can read more about this using technology to challenge traditional education. And Mitra argues that if you allow educational process to self-organize, that is, the teachers are, instead of planners with a set, we're going to do this on week 1, this on week 2, to be searchers, where they're searching for the best way. Because obviously just throwing computers at kids or having them just go step by step in computer programs may not work. So we don't know the best way. It's a question of discovering. He says here it's not about making it happen, it's letting it happen. The school in the cloud, he talks about a sixth sense, somehow students trying to learn, teachers trying to teach, and the internet with this composite of information. If we set up the right institutional structure, we can get advances in education. He says this kind of learning is going to drive classrooms. Now, I haven't put up material here on Khan Academy, Khan Academy, and presumably most students are familiar with this, but you have a similar story there where Salman Khan basically is teaching his nieces and nephews math via Skype sessions, and he finds out that they would prefer it, they like it when he records his presentation rather than when he's talking to them in person, at least for teaching math. And so that ends up with him recording videos for them and then for others. And then you've got Bill Gates and all sorts of people involved with online lessons. So instead of being under the gun in class where you've got to answer the question with everyone looking at you and the teacher asking, you've got a system where you've got a video leading you through these math steps, and you're not, your discovery process or interest can help. And the Khan Academy finds that many people do better this way. And in fact, as you look at this, you'll find that Khan talks about classrooms being flipped. That is, instead of the teacher giving the lecture in class and then having kids do the homework at home, the teachers assign the videos from Khan Academy so they can be presented with the content, and then they come to class and do the homework. And that way the teacher can go from group to group, student to student, and try and help them where they're struggling to apply the concepts that were presented in the Khan Academy lectures. So classrooms transforming because the educational content is online. That's not going to work for everyone, but the teacher then is a advisor, consultant, mentor who's trying to help us, sort through these materials. And that's, the way many of these turns have done in education, teaching ideas in school. So he says, our traditional classroom, the teacher just lecturing, that's going to go away, and instead we're going to use online and other sort of combination of in-person and online services. So here's an organization, the International Association of K-12 Online Learning, and they have they have a document online on the website at the link below where they said here's what the federal government should do to facilitate these. Base accountability on individual student growth. They argue you want a student-centered, competency-based learning. So if you find a way to measure this, if the school is accountable and the classroom is accountable on the basis of what the student actually learns, then you can use online learning when it works and in-person classroom learning when it works, but you've got a way to measure what works and what doesn't. Support performance-based systems of assessment. Again, the core is managing, it's measuring. The idea here is if it matters, you got to measure it. And so setting up a system where you can measure the accomplishments is good. It says support federal research for high quality online learning. Key issue here is we don't know what works best. We'd like to know, but we don't know. We read articles, we study success in India, Africa, or places in the US, but the traditional place for the federal government in many areas, NASA and others, is in research. So federal research that would try and find the best quality education and what works, what doesn't, and disseminate that knowledge to the states and to the schools. And that actually is a tradition in higher education in the US, the federal government funded research and disseminating that research across the country. Support human capital development, and what that means is training teachers and so forth through redesign, pre-service, and service training. So we've got a whole range of, every school district, every state has a whole bunch of training programs for teachers. They're suggesting that teachers should learn more about the options in online education that weren't available 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, but now are. And so a big part of this is you've got to have reliable and ubiquitous access to the internet and quality learning materials on the internet. So, and of course, internet's a problem too. Internet is endless video games, endless distraction, YouTube videos, and so forth. So you've got to provide access to students to educational materials, but some sort of a incentive system or monitoring system or system that help students learn rather than, play and get distracted. So that's, again, and there's a policy study at this link saying these are the federal steps we think should be taken to allow us to move forward here. Related to Mitra's work and the work that's discussed in the Wired magazine story is the work of James Tooley in his book, The Beautiful Tree. Fascinating story here. Tooley is doing research for the World Bank on private schools. He's in India. He's in Hyderabad, a city in India. He's done his research. He's looked at the private schools where the wealthy send their children. And then he's touring Old City Hyderabad, a poor part of town, dense and so forth. He sees a sign for a private school that he didn't know about. He talks to the taxi driver. He finds another sign, and he begins talking to the people who run these small private schools that aren't official. That is, they're not legal. The government officials he's talked about didn't know about them. And it turns out there's some 500 private schools run by entrepreneurs in Old City Hyderabad. that the very poor people in India are unhappy with the poor quality of the government schools in India, at least the poor parts of India, and so they send their children to private schools. Even though they don't have much money, but the private schools don't cost much money. That is, the people with an education, the entrepreneurs, they'll start a private school, they've got a college degree, their other options aren't very strong. So again, some 500 private schools in Old City Hyderabad. And so from this, Thule goes on to research in other cities in India and then in Africa, and he finds there are private schools all over the poor parts of the world, and that's where the majority of very poor people get their education. Even though the state provides free education, often with support from the World Bank or international organizations. So these informal schools are generally illegal. The state regulators have tried to shut them down in India and other places. And you can read about this online. So the link I have to this article is about it. We link also to videos about the small fishing village in Ghana, on the seacoast of Ghana, where there's a government school, free education, but there's 5 thriving informal schools operated by entrepreneurs that parents send their kids to just because they work better. Now, in economics, we talk about incentives and information, and the incentive system set up in the developing world for poor schools just isn't adequate to provide the schooling that we'd like to have. You can look at James Thule's TEDx presentation that's also online, and I have a link to that. I don't have a link to that. Well, that's the end of my talk, and we'll have in supporting materials links to these other materials. Thank you very much for listening, if you got this far, and hope you enjoy the TED videos. They're terrific, and you'll find valuable materials for your research. Thank you. Bye.